is a Jew and Stalin is a Jew, and you don't want to hire them because they're a retarded Canadian, you should be allowed to do that. Any reason that you want to fire somebody, you should be allowed to fire them.
Okay, so when BlackRock says we're going to introduce ESG scores and DEI scores, and therefore you can't get Silicon Valley capital, you can't get access to loans, you can't get access to bank accounts unless you have the right score, can't you see that the same type of tyranny that you're so grateful that you were protected from could actually end up being weaponized against you as well?
We have civil rights legislation in America that already protects against this. Some state attorney generals are taking action. Not enough. More Republican state attorney generals should be fighting back against exactly what you're talking about, Simon. Because civil rights legislation does allow us to fight back against this type of DEI, this type of woke crap, this type of discrimination.
Sure, but it requires money, right, to win those, right?
Everything requires money, Simon.
Yeah, exactly. So if you don't have money, then you don't get the same type of protection as somebody that's able to afford.
Where is there a society where you get?
I'm not comparing America in relation to other places. I'm trying to help you identify that when the big beautiful bill is ushering in a surveillance state and is paying for all the technology to pull together all the different sources of Americans' data. And the same company that did that just did occupation as a service, genocide as a service, integration with drones in Ukraine, and has been using that data and technology. You can see in a general direction that there was a beta test in 2020 by Trump.
Total nonsense. Americans aren't getting locked up for their speech.
I didn't say they were getting locked up.
That's
I'm saying that the technology is being
used. And if you don't see that, you don't even know what you're implying with what you're saying.
That's what Andrew does. He puts words in people's mouth.
Oh, really? Where is the puck going? I'm following where the puck is going. If you're talking about a surveillance state, they're surveilling all Americans. Genocide as a service for the government. What would be the consequences of a corporation like that being in power? What's the consequences? What are the implications of what he's saying, Mofit?
Do you not
what kind of a name is Mofit? What is this name? Muhammad Fitness? Like, what is this name?
Andrew, like, let's just have a conversation. Like, why have you always got to just try and get into the lowest degenerate?
Bruh, your buddy Mofit jumped in. If I got to go 2-on-1, I'll go 2-on-1.
Yeah, but like, if you want to turn this into a Jerry Springer show, I don't think anyone's interested in that. People are actually here to learn shit. You're just wasting people's time if you want to, fuck around turning it into a Jerry Springer show. It's just boring.
Jerry.
See, this is the problem with Zios, man. They're just fucking unbearable in terms of...
Exactly. Like, they think everything's a joke.
Like, yeah, I guess you probably start chanting Jerry as you're watching the genocide as well, right?
Yeah, look, I'm not having the space derail. I think you were asking some really good questions and there could have been a really good conversation. It's a shame he didn't want to partake in the conversation, but maybe if there is another Zio who does want to partake in that conversation in good faith, then it's good to have. Look, I think one thing about us on the space, especially the regular panelists, we always want to have conversation. Like, people can disagree with us vehemently, but willing to do so. You saw that chick who came earlier. Like, I will let her finish her point. I wanted to, I think having genuine conversations is really important because it just debunks a lot of the kind of weaknesses people have, and it makes all of us come to better understanding our points. So, Simon, I appreciate you trying to jump in and have that conversation with him in good faith, but unfortunately he wasn't willing to do so. And listen, I do give Andrew an opportunity to speak on these bases, but this was just complete derailment at that point. There was something I was looking at just to add to the point about EPIRUS and the links to Palantir. So I mentioned Joe Lonsdale, who's one of the founders of EPIRUS, and he's also a founder of Palantir, and the link between them. And
also a Jew.
Yeah, Jew Zionist as well. But also what I just found now was just a few months ago, EPIRUS joined Palantir's Warp Speed program, which was an AI-powered initiative to accelerate manufacturing for defense and commercial sectors. Basically what it did was there's a partnership between Palantir and EPIRUS, and they were basically scaling production for its high-power microwave systems. So what you find is EPIRUS and Palantir essentially being one company but separate, and EPIRUS is almost like the private arm of Palantir, but then it's getting the defense contracts and being able to do all these things, and it's all run by Jewish Zionists. Simon, what's your thoughts on that when you look at it from like, because I know one of your arguments is that, oh, guess what? Well, one's a public company, and you got to do it what is best for it. But what about when they start creating private arms like EPIRUS?
Yeah, I mean, private companies are held to a completely different level of disclosure, transparency, and governance to a public company, and that's how a lot of the power structure, like people use NGOs, people use private corporations, and so this is a way of siphoning off money for covert operations or things that would be less acceptable under different types of structures. So this happens all over the place. I mean, the amount of shell companies that are set up in order to achieve certain things, and then you can use offshore jurisdictions, including Israel, in order to achieve things that would not be acceptable in your own country if they were to hit the scrutiny of judicial. Then you can set up these offshore structures in order to do the beta test things that would be completely unacceptable as per the Constitution. And then later, if it gets traction, you can just gobble it up into Palantir or Google, and that is the point. And this is what the British Empire did all the time. It had all these different islands in order to do things that wouldn't be acceptable in its own country, and that's what I think happens.
Exactly like what Epstein was doing. He had all these islands where he was doing things that weren't acceptable, right, Simon?
Exactly.
Simon, I have got a question for you on that, but let me just quickly read a couple of super chats. But there's a reason I'm asking this question, and I just want to get your perspective on it. The first one is a super chat from Thomas. He said, "Thank you for running one of the most honest, truth-speaking spaces on X. A £10 contribution to the space. Appreciate you, Thomas. And yes, we do try and do that, and we do try and give people a voice, and then we come to more. I think give people different perspectives, and then people understand the strength of certain arguments and the weaknesses of others." I also have one from Rod, who basically said £10 super chat to the contribution. I think Andrew got him angry, so I don't know. We need to bring Andrew back. People are getting bare vexed with Andrew, but they're sending a super chat, so I don't know. But they're all, damn, every time Andrew gets on, he starts shit. I was on JRQ earlier, and he made Keith, the Keith who's calm and collective, angry. Get rid of this Jew. He's slow IQ. So, Andrew definitely causing waves in the super chats for sure. Now, Simon, the reason I'm asking this question is, and obviously do clarify, because maybe I don't want to misrepresent your position, but your argument is that the corporate, basically people put corporate interests first, and the corporations are in charge, and then everything's done, and the corporations are have to answer to the shareholders. But then you basically have it where essentially Palantir, you can say, has created a kind of private arm which gets funding, and then they're able to do the things they do. When we say Palantir, it's not Palantir, it's basically Jewish Zionists within Palantir. So I mean, how does that frame with your argument? Because now they're able to, then your argument doesn't stand anymore in terms of like, this is for corporate interests. Basically, they're creating this for other interests. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of structures like that. You can have foundations, you can have NGOs, you can have private companies, and people in trying to achieve corrupt means or legitimate means or achieve their goals use all sorts of structures. Like, that's the whole purpose of a limited liability company, to limit the liability to that particular company. And so if you want to set up a company, then that's what lawfare is about, really, just limiting the liability to that corporation, and hiding things. And it all depends if it's an offshore company as well, because there's different levels of disclosure.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, this company can be created for essentially Jewish Zionist interests, a private arm, and then it's not really for corporate interests. Is basically what I'm trying to say.
No, you can when it's a private company, you're subordinate to your shareholders, so you could be the shareholder, and when you are the primary shareholder, or you have someone, the shareholder could be Zionist interests, it could be an Israeli company, and then you are subordinate to that shareholder structure, and you could just set up a Fugazi company that doesn't take on external investors, and therefore you're not accountable to any of those external investors. But in general, the rule is, and this is why the Silicon Valley industry exists, is that once you sell shares in your company, you have fiduciary duties to those shareholders. And as your company gets bigger, and then if it hits the level of public company disclosure, the responsibility and the burden for transparency and the consequences for violating your fiduciary duties just gets stricter and stricter.
Yeah, but here's where there's a gray area, Simon. When you say the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, they only care about making profits for shareholders. They don't care about the means or how they do it. If that means creating weapons to go and kill people, or supporting, an AI that's going to help target innocent victims, as is what Lavender and Where's Daddy does, that's no longer really serving fiduciary interest of the shareholders, even though it's profitable, is it? Because from a moralistic or ethical standpoint, that's clearly amoral. And some would argue that's not what I signed up for. I don't want to be involved with a company that mass murders innocent victims. So there's a gray area when you say fiduciary duty.
Correct, but there is no. So the fiduciary duty is defined in corporate law, the Articles of Association and the company bylaws. And so if you have no ethical considerations, which most corporations don't, then you're only subjected to, if you breach the law, then you're putting the company at unnecessary risk. But if you follow the law, then your job is to maximize the value for shareholders, and that's got nothing to do with an ethical consideration.
But then you see the underlying conflict of interest then, and why organizations prefer to be structured as a corporation, because then they can avoid potential liability or anyone actually going to jail for crimes that end up getting committed through the work that corporation has been able to achieve. Another example would be Big Pharma and, say, Pfizer. They create bioweapons to kill people. Does anyone ever go to jail for those crimes, for killing over 700,000 Americans, millions more across the world? No one does. So they get off. At best, they'll get a fine, which they can pay off, because the way they look at it, we'll make over $100 billion projection based on the sale of this vaccine. And we might get a $2 or $3 billion fine because we killed a bunch of people. We might have to set up a fund for restitution. No big deal. Based on cost-benefit analysis, we'll kill millions of people. It's worth it. So that's a cop-out.
Yeah.
And as you know, Pfizer is run by a Jew as well, Albert Bourla.
Yeah, so again, if you break law and commit crime, then you're responsible for those crimes. But we know ultimately power is dictated by money. You can pay lobby, you can corrupt politicians, you can bribe politicians.
Simon, but they may get convicted criminally even, right? To the fullest extent of the law. All they will face is a fine. No one goes to jail.
Yeah, and the whole purpose of limited liability is to, with the exception of criminal law, is to limit the civil violations to the confines of the corporation. So you can take risk. And you can limit the liability to that corporation. That's the entire purpose.
Yeah, but they take it to a whole other level. They're not just committing risk; they're committing crimes, including murder and injury, and they get away with it.
Yeah,
impunity.
So you
do it over and over again.
Means corruption, but it's completely illegal still.
Simon, if an individual gets convicted criminally and does end up getting punished, is he able to then resume his same activity and continue selling those same goods and killing people? An individual.
Well, here we go. You're talking about the failure of the system, and there is consistent failure.
Individual X goes and starts making guns, and he uses that gun to go and kill people. He gets caught, convicted, and then he gets out of jail, and then he wants to go resume the same activity. Can an individual do that versus the corporation, which does the exact same thing?
Well, a corporation shouldn't be allowed to violate.
A corporation gets
laws.
Away with murder, the individual can't. Do you understand the inherent conflict of interest then behind how these murderers and these Jews hide behind corporations to go out and commit their crimes and get away with it?
That's not exclusive to Jews. That happens all over the.
Jews are at the forefront. The Jews are at the forefront of ownership structure within a lot of these corporations. For instance, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard control 90% of the corporations on the S&P 500.
They don't. Jewish people don't own 90%.
They do. I'm sorry, they do. BlackRock. Do you want me to name you some of the C-suite?
Give me. Yeah, I'll go through it, but it's not 90% of 90% of BlackRock is not owned by Jews.
Hold on, I didn't say none. Well, first of all, BlackRock's executive committee is all Jews except for one.
Yeah, but
So
executives
that's
are
one. Two,
executives are
you didn't hear
subordinate
what
to
I said. Then you
shareholders.
misunderstood what I said. I said BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard have controlling interests in 90% of the companies on the S&P 500 and most of the
Oh,
companies
that's
on the
correct.
Nasdaq.
Yeah,
That's a
correct. Yeah,
fact. So
that's
there you
correct.
go.
Yeah.
They're able to shield it. So therefore, because they have this
But
controlling
who owns
interest.
BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard?
Well, I've just told you who the executive committee members are who control policy within
But
BlackRock.
executive is
So they're the
subordinate
ones
to
that can.
shareholders. Shareholders
Look,
as
that's
well.
why. Well, they don't care about shareholders. When Larry Fink goes on a show in 2017 and says we need to push both DEI and ESG on these corporations and force corporate behavior, is he representing the interest of the shareholders?
Yeah, that was very profitable for BlackRock. They made trillions of dollars out of that.
Yeah, so there you. So you're saying so now, but so now you're not making the distinction between fiduciary duty, what the shareholders actually care about, versus what BlackRock cares about. So yeah, it might make a buck
as
in
a
an immoral way.
corporation,
DEI does not benefit the
your job is
masses.
not. As a corporation, your job is to you're accountable to the profit for shareholders. There's no ethical consideration unless it actually damages your shareholder value.
I mean, they also don't care about reputational risk either. Like Pfizer doesn't care. It's killed millions of people. So why would shareholder? How is it benefiting shareholders to kill millions of people just because it's profitable? And that means they only care about money first. They don't care about the damage they do.
Yes, that's the exact structure. It's money first, and that's why.
Okay, so then you see the Jews in charge of these corporations care about money first,
and then you can use lobby in order to blackmail and break law.
Okay, then we can agree that the likes of, say, Larry Ellison or Mark Zuckerberg or Alex Karp only care about profits first. They don't care how they make it, irrespective of what shareholders think. And by the way, Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, he controls the voting. That's always been my argument.
He has the power structure of America is mainly centered around profits, and the most powerful corporations have to meet quarterly profit goals. Otherwise, their share price crashes and they make less money. And the politicians can't put together a long-term strategy because every 2 years they have to get re-elected. And if you do anything that's long-term, you end up losing the vote to somebody that will do short-term strategies. And that's the whole point.
They also get to insider trade and make a fortune like Nancy Pelosi has. So they're not even incentivized to want to push corporations to do the right thing, because otherwise you can impact their profitability, and all they care about is money too. So you see the system is rigged from within, and these same politicians are also incentivized and beholden to the interests of Israel through the Jewish lobbies like AIPAC, UDP, etc. So you see the whole system is rigged. So the problem where you and I differ is that the Jews control the systems both on the finance and the political side. You just say it's corporations, but I'm telling you the Jews control the corporations.
Yeah, but I can go down the shareholder
Jews only care about money.
I can go down the shareholder structure, and there is certainly a faction of power called Jewish power that exists. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's not the full power structure. There are significantly greater power structures that have got nothing to do with Judaism or being ethnically Jewish.
It's the only power structure that matters and gets to make all the big decisions, and the one that's enabling the genocide in Palestine.
I'll go through it.
If there wasn't Jewish power, there wouldn't be genocide in Palestine.
I'll come back on Suleiman Space. I'll go do the research, and I'll give you the exact demographic breakdown for what we have. There will be flaws in it, so we can debate it. But I can assure you that the Jewish power structure is subordinate to another power structure.
What we'll do is we'll set up a conversation between Simon and Truth on this. It's not a debate. I think they both had so many conversations on these spaces, so I think it'll be like a very respectful conversation. And let's break it down and let's find out what the veracity of both claims are, and then we'll take it from there. And I think it'll be a good knowledge-based discussion from them, where a lot of people will learn a lot of points. And obviously, I'll run around.
I'm just scared that Simon's going to become a bigger anti-Semite once he finds out the truth from his research.
Well, I'll always be anti-Zionist. I think Zionism is a absolute crime against humanity. But I believe personally, you could be born Jewish, and I think that doesn't mean that your actions are determined by your tribe.
Yeah, I mean,
let the Israelis know that, Simon.
I don't believe that either. No, I agree with Simon. Look, listen, well, in that regard, obviously you guys have the conversation, but I don't believe that. Like, if you believe in God, obviously, and which I do, and if you believe in spirituality and you believe that there's a purpose in life, then if you believe like in determinism or God's already determined things for you, then it kind of goes against this whole idea of a just God. So I don't think that your entire life is determined. I think what happens is each person is given certain tools, and then it's how you use those tools and those abilities in the best manner possible that determines your basically whether you succeed in this life or the hereafter. But I can see how like more of a like evolutionary atheistic position can be like, oh, guess what, everything just fully determined. But I don't agree with that. But in terms of separate, I think Truth's religious as well, so I don't think he fully believes that as well. In terms of from a genetic perspective, of the reason why. But then the question becomes, why is it that there's a society such as Israel, which is so decrepit, so evil, and it is a society based on it is a Jewish supremacist society. And what's the reason for that? Now, is it genetic or is it based on, unfortunately, what happens is when you have evil within evil and they basically culturally become something like that and it forms part of your culture and society, and then that causes that evil nature. I think it's the latter. But there is such a disproportionate number of people who support this evil. What was it, 90? What did I just see a stat yesterday? Truth, you could probably remind me on it. Is it 70 or 90%? I can't remember now because I was just a couple of days ago, but I'm a bit under the weather. Of people supported. They said that there is no innocent person in Gaza. There's no innocent man. There's no innocent woman. There's no innocent child. There's no innocent baby. I can't remember the figure. Was it 70% or 90%? That I can't remember. But that just shows you how evil this society has become. Sorry, Truth. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's what a lot of the Jewish politicians state. I mean, this is exactly what the likes of Yoav Gallant have stated when they say, no food, no water, no fuel. We're dealing with human animals. Or what the president of Israel also stated, that, every man, woman, child is a target in Gaza, that Isaac Herzog. So numerous Jewish politicians have stated this because based on their ideology and their faith, they look at Gentiles as human animals. They're subhuman. And that's why, they have no issues demoralizing them that way and essentially not even acknowledging them as equals. To your question about the inherent nature of evil, is it just intrinsic? Is it genetic? Or is it based on, say, outside factors? I mean, it's definitely rooted in religious belief because that's where a lot of the verses that they cite come from, and it's definitely been taught over the years. But in terms of Israel's existence and how that came about, it was a logical conclusion from his history and the experiences they've had. I mean, they've been kicked out of 109 countries 1,034 times because they kept committing crimes and they were unwilling to conform to the laws of the land. So they concluded, okay, we keep getting kicked out. We need a home base somewhere where we can't get kicked out anymore because we'll call the shots. But we're not going to change our ways. We're never going to conform. We're going to continue to segregate ourselves and create our own institutions and our own establishments that's going to enable us to be, to control and dominate. And if someone has a problem with that, we're not going to control the laws of the land to the extent that we can. But if we get caught committing crimes, we're just going to run off to Israel to avoid prosecution. So it really was a culmination of consistent misbehavior and crime committing where they get caught and have to face consequences, but now they have a solution to those consequences. They can just run off to Israel and avoid extradition and the consequences they otherwise face in the various countries they live in mainly in America and Europe. And so, there's still some left in the Middle East as well. So you see that it absolutely was evil, but it was also unwillingness to confront reality that they're just bad people, that they don't like to abide by the laws of the land and they want to get ahead by cheating through usury.
But when you say, so it's a question to you, and I'm just asking your opinion, I'm not debating it.
Go ahead.
When you say they're bad people, do you believe that they are bad because they're just born like that or because of cultural norms? And obviously, when you talk about religion, I don't believe Judaism is the right religion in my personal view. And therefore, it's more of a kind of cultural or religious presentation, even from that perspective, or whether it's culture or whatever it is, that causes that to happen. So is it something that you believe that they're born with or something that the culture kind of creates?
Okay, so I believe it's a combination of the two, and I'll explain that. So because
do you believe that they're born evil?
I think there's some intrinsic negative features as a result of the inbreeding, which causes the paranoid delusion, the schizophrenia. That can definitely how would I say it, highlight or really even worsen the deleterious nature of the behaviors that they do. So for instance, someone has just an evil nature that he may be born with. It may not be as bad if his parents weren't doing the inbreeding, or his ancestors weren't doing inbreeding, because it manifests itself more from that inbreeding. Now, if there's proper genetic recombination, because there isn't that inbreeding, there's a possibility that those negative traits could just kind of be passed off, and then come to a termination. But that doesn't happen with the Jews, so they just keep manifesting those negative features that I mentioned. That the mental illness, unfortunately, which is then worsened, or it's then complemented with the ideology as well, which has a lot of bad ideas, such as, say, usury.
Genuine question.
Yep.
Genuine question, because maybe you or Ian can answer this. What percentage of Jewish people partake in inbreeding? Because, for example, when you look at the Ashkenazi, the whole idea of Ashkenazi was that initially Jewish people married into white Europeans, right? And hence you had the Ashkenazi tribe, right? Oh, sorry, the Ashkenazi lineage. So I'm trying to understand what percentage of them are basically based on inbreeding, because now when you look at it, and again, this is anecdotal, I've not looked at the percentages, it's and this is why I don't believe in the 17 million figure or the 24 million. I think there's 500 million or 1 billion. There's a huge amount of them. And a lot of them is that they're marrying outside into different cultures, into different societies, into different traditions. But if that being the case, then it's not inbreeding. But I just want to know what your thoughts are in terms of what the figures are or what the situation is.
Very hard to get.
They're all from the tribe of Abraham, aren't they?
Just a sec. So it's very hard to get exact numbers on level of inbreeding. What we do know is they say that Ashkenazis are descendants of 300 families, for instance, and even 4 women. So we know they've done a lot of inbreeding for at least over 1,000 years, that is then unfortunately passed on these negative features and these genetic defects such as mental illness, paranoia, schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, etc., that continues to manifest itself. You see, the Jews aren't trusting of Gentiles at all. So part of that, again, to your original question, is definitely from the inbreeding and genetic feature. The other part of that is from ideology and what they're taught growing up. I mean, even before these kids can grow up, before they can even start talking, they're taught that they're victims. They'll be talking about the Holocaust within their families, and that everybody wants to kill them. I've literally heard Jews say this sentence: everybody wants to kill you, everyone wants to persecute you, here's your history, here's what you need to know. I mean, when a kid's already born with a genetic defect of, again, mental illness and schizophrenia, how do you think he's going to end up as he grows older and thinks that, well, anyone that says something bad about Jews or bad about Israel hates me and wants to kill me? That's why you hear the Israelis actually say that we need to kill these infants at a young age because they could grow up to be terrorists. That is a manifestation of their level of delusion and schizophrenia, paranoia. That a young kid who's disarmed and is just learning about life and reality. There's a fear that in 10 years' time that kid could grow up to be a militant and want to kill them, even though they have absolutely no idea how that kid could end up. Somehow they have this foresight to know, and that's absolutely based on a combination of both genetic defect and also what's taught to them at a very young age. So they're both to blame, I'd say. Now, in terms of whether it's 60-40, 50-50, it's very hard to make that distinction. But I'd say it extends beyond just Ashkenazis, because we know that Ben-Gvir, among others, who, by the way, if you look at the cabinet, you've got Jews from Tunisia, from Morocco, again from Iraqi Kurd. Ben-Gvir's Iraqi Kurd. They're not Ashkenazis, but they're some of the worst as well. Ben-Gvir is extremely evil. Some say even more so than Netanyahu. He has no problems killing kids, and he's arming settlers in the West Bank to go out and kill Palestinians and steal their homes. So I don't believe it's just limited to Ashkenazism. So maybe that could add to the analysis as well.
Oh no, I don't. That wasn't the argument I'm making. I don't think it's limited. I was trying to make the argument with the Ashkenazi. So if you look at even within Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews actually perform better academically than the rest of them, and I believe, obviously I know people may disagree, but I believe that that's because of basically procreating with white people, and therefore you have this kind of hybrid situation, which then improved the IQ levels. So I'm just trying to say that if they're basically breeding with white people, then clearly that's not what we call inbreeding.
Yeah, so guys, start at the beginning, right? Are we defining a Jew as the tribe, the Moses, the prophet Moses? Is that where you start the Jew? Where do you start this whole tribe?
That's a very good question. And if you ask 10 Jews, they'll give you 11 answers. And I've asked this question to 10 Jews, I've gotten 11 answers. So this is based on my own experience. So does it start at Moses when he got the 10 Commandments? Or does it start, for instance, when the first Torah was compiled around 500 BC? Or is it when the last Talmud was compiled in and around 300 or 500 AD? Or is it when Moses first met God? They'll never give you a straight answer. So we can't have one starting point, and they're all going to disagree. I'm like, so who was the first Jew? Was it Moses, or was it Abraham, who you consider the grandfather of Judaism? You'll never get a straight answer on that. So again, then if you want to build on that point as to who may have been the first Jew, because if you say the Talmud, then Christianity is older than Judaism, right away they get offended and say that's BS, Christ was the Jew, whatever you want to think. But the point being, they can't agree on a starting point. They can't. What the majority of them will agree on is rabbinic authority supersedes Torah authority, and that was based on statements made within the Midrash by the grand rabbinical authorities at the time, in and around 400 to 500 BC. And I can go through that set of verses where they actually make that claim. So when people also try to ignore the fact that the Talmud doesn't necessarily have to constitute Judaism as a whole, that's also another false statement, because all Jews still have to go through the bar mitzvah process, and that's not even referenced anywhere in the Torah. That's a part of the Talmud. So you see, with the Jews, if you want to take their religion as a whole and include the Talmud, then it may not have started till around when the Babylonian Talmud was canonized in and around 500 AD, right? So you tell me then, Simon.
Well, as a Muslim, I obviously believe the Quranic scriptures, and so it was when Prophet Musa, gave a particular covenant, which is Bani Israel, and it's a tribe, and that tribe had to fulfill a certain covenant, and they breached all those covenants. So we believe in that. I believe in that, but that's because I'm a Muslim.
Okay, but Rabbi Eliezer, so he goes based on what the Midrash was completed in around actually 900 AD, and that gives absolute authority of the rabbis based on what's stated in the Midrash. So you must obey their authority. You can't question their authority of the rabbi, even if they're wrong. And that's the rabbi word supersedes even that of God's in Judaism. And it's only Kirites follow just word of God, and they're a super small minority within Judaism. And it's Rabbi Eliezer who is the grand rabbi that made this declaration towards the end. And they go through that whole story where even though miracles were produced to prove that, hey, God does exist and he should supersede, the Jews simply didn't believe it. And it's the Jews of the Sanhedrin, by the way, the main authority at the time, that made the conclusion that it's us rabbis that call the shots over the word of God. So that's what the grand majority of Jews believe.
The world started on October the 7th, 2023. And 3,000 years before that, there's only 2 data points.
I mean, if you want to go back to...
Sounds quite interesting, mate, there, Simon.
I mean, if you look at what they did at the Chicago Grand Fair, what were they celebrating, Simon? That was like the 3,000-year history of Judaism. They made a makeshift Moloch, and they looked like they were sacrificing kids. Don't know that was happening. Judge for yourself from the videos that we saw, right? So that's what some Jews also proclaim, who they actually worship.
Let's bring in Jay. Jay, you've had your hand up for ages.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, the debate between, by the way, good afternoon. Appreciate the mic, Solomon. Interesting space, as always. So, I guess to get to the heart of the conversation, truth, quick yes or no. When you mention the fact that you think Jews are disproportionately predisposed to evil, right? Do you mean only Ashkenazi Jews, or are you also talking about Sephardic and the other ones too?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Sephardics are also implicated. They're the ones who set up the first the central bank in Amsterdam. And what purpose was that for?
Perfect. So, great. I'm glad you said that. So, if you look at the genetic similarities between Ashkenazis, Sephardics, and what's the other one?
Mizrahi.
Jews. Mizrahi Jews. The genetic component that they all share, the Semitic component, is far more pronounced in Palestinians, actually, than it is in actual Jewish people. So if you think that the connection between them is what proves that they're all evil, then those genetics actually have a stronger standing in Palestinian people. So you can't really say it's
but you're
all
missing one
Jews
main
and
component
it's a genetic thing. What's
You're
that?
missing the ideology component, because it's a combination of two.
Yeah, no, that's the culture.
No,
that's what I was about to get to.
Why
That's
you
what I was
failed
about
to
to get to,
implicate the Jewish culture then, right? Because those that figure it out.
Do you know
what admission you just made there?
Not
Do you know
at
what
all.
admission you just made
Not
there?
at all.
That if you change your ideology,
do.
then maybe you have a shot at redemption and you'll be a better person. So if you stop being a Jew, you'll be a better person. You just conceded that point. Do you realize that?
Yeah, but according to what you're saying,
You
according
just
to what you've told
inadvertently
me
admitted that
before,
Judaism is an evil
no, but
ideology. But even if you're
but truth,
genetically
you've
defective,
told me
hey, if you
before.
change your
But
ideology,
truth.
become a
Hold
Christian
on,
or a
Wait, Truth,
Muslim.
let him speak.
truth.
No, I get
Hold
your
on,
argument,
truth.
Truth. Let's just hear what he's
Yeah,
got to say, because then you can hear his
yeah.
argument and then you can respond.
You've told me before that even though I have never stepped foot in a synagogue, even though I was not raised by my Jewish parents and I was adopted and I have no connection to them, you've told me also that I'm inherently evil and I'm beyond redemption and my opinion doesn't matter because I'm always going to be biased in favor of Jews. So you have told me that. So you don't think it's only culture. You do believe it's a genetic thing that's inescapable. So don't switch up the argument just depending on which space you're in. I do encourage you to stay consistent with that point of view, if that's your point of view. Now, if you've changed that point of view, it would be nice to hear an acknowledgement that you don't believe that, just because someone has Ashkenazi or Sephardic lineage, that they're automatically evil, and you believe culture plays a huge role in that. It would be nice to hear an admission that maybe you've changed your opinion. But if not, that's fine. You're not obligated to change your opinion. But, I would like to point out,
Are you going to let me answer
everyone
that?
in this conversation. Yeah. What was that?
Okay, well, I'd like to answer that.
Yeah, sure. Just give me 1 second to wrap up. Then you can respond. Everyone in this conversation is actually in favor of, holding Zionists accountable. So there is that point of agreement, and I think that should probably be, the largest focus because nobody, on this stage, at least to the best of my knowledge, is in favor of the apartheid state and the genocide that are happening right now. But yeah, real quick, I just wanted to, highlight, another point that just came to, my eyes for all the people who are still on Trump's bandwagon and think,
Let's do that one point and then come back in there, Jay.
yeah. There a quote has just resurfaced
Truth,
from
do you want to respond to that? And
1998.
I
then we'll
would,
come
but he
back, Jay.
keeps talking. So look, I was quite.
No, what
Sorry,
Simon's
go
saying
ahead,
is,
go ahead. Yeah,
yeah,
responsible.
because the
I'll
Trump
put my
thing's
hand
a
up.
bit, yeah, because the
Go
Trump thing's a
go
bit
ahead.
irrelevant. I in the sense of, like, you can definitely come back to that point, but it's just gonna divert the conversation. So I'll agree with Simon. Go ahead, Truth.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I've been quite consistent with my position. I'm not sure where your confusion lies. I didn't limit it to just Ashkenazi. I mean, I think even Solomon agreed with me there as well, because I pointed out that you're both Sephardics, and even I gave examples of Mizrahi Jews as well, are equally evil, or could be even more evil or less evil. What I also pointed out is that I don't know the percentage of what the origin of the evil nature can derive from, relative to genetics versus, say, phenotype, environmental factors, and of course ideology, culture. That's very difficult to ascertain. But if you pull one of them out, such as, say, culture, ideology, religion, etc., and then say that child gets raised, say, I don't know, Catholic, Orthodox, Christian, Muslim, any other faith, then they have perhaps a chance of redemption and a better way of life, because they won't adopt that mindset that they're superior, they're chosen, and that Gentiles are inferior to them, and their whole outlook on the world changes. So perhaps that's how you were raised, even though you may be ethnically Jewish. However, because of your religious faith, you're being guided differently. So I've been quite consistent with my view here. So let's be quite clear that the distinction is to be made. All I said was that when you're born a Jew, ethnically Jew, and you have some of those genetic defects as a result of inbreeding, what will happen is it'll magnify those negative traits, and I even stated what they were: schizophrenia, paranoia, multiple personality disorder, and constantly thinking the world's after you. And that gets magnified further when you're taught that, well, everybody wants to kill you because you're a Jew and you've been persecuted historically, and of course they'll bring up the Holocaust, and now they bring up 10/7. Do you understand now?
Yeah, but Drew, I'm talking specifically about what you've told me. You've told me before
Okay, why are you
that
making
my
this about
opinion
yourself?
always.
This is narcissism right
Yeah,
now.
no,
So right now you're suffering from
because
Jewish
I'm pointing
Jewish
out the
narcissism. Hey, you're
inconsistency.
making it about yourself.
Because I'm pointing out your
No, I've
inconsistency,
been
Truth. So
consistent.
all I'm asking you to do is to be consistent.
Yes,
That's
I've been
all. So,
consistent. I think you're
you
just
know,
confused, and right now your narcissism is getting the better
no,
of you.
you haven't
You're
been
trying to make a
consistent because
general
you told
argument
me
about Jews about
before. You
yourself.
told
This is
me
narcissism.
before. No, you.
It's
But
okay. I hope you get
all I'm
treatment
asking
for
is
it.
for consistency. You told me before that none of my opinion matters because of the fact that I'm half Ashkenazi. So
No, I said wait a
I
minute. That's
hear.
not true. I said that your opinion will automatically be biased. It'll have a biased tinge to it because of your ethnically Jewish nature. I've said the same thing to Simon as well. So I've been consistent once again.
Yeah.
You're never going to be completely objective and condemn Jews for all their criminality, their historical criminality.
So
And you
then could I
and Simon
also
are
make
consistent. You'll just
well,
limit
hold
it
on.
to Zionism. You won't call out the Jews and their
But
2,000 plus year history of criminality
I'm not
that's been very well
Zionist. I'm
documented. You're in
absolutely
denial
not
about the fact that,
Zionist.
for instance, David Sassoon was a Jew. He wasn't a
Maybe you're
Zionist, and he
confusing.
had the biggest drug empire in the world, and he killed millions of people. What did he have to do with Zionism,
Maybe you're
Jay?
confusing my position with Simon's. I've never said that Judaism is beyond criticism. I
Well, what do
do
you
believe
criticize
that
about
if you
Judaism,
look
Jay?
at, I criticize that in the Talmud, it does seem to put Goyim at the bottom of the totem pole, and it does seem easier to,
So then you admit
I
it's
guess,
evil.
be ethnocentric and rally around other Jews if Judaism is your religion. But then I could also point out, Truth, that you and Ian also both believe that white people should do the same thing. So aren't you arguing for white people to do the same thing Jews are
But
doing
only one
just for
side of that
white people?
equation is shamed for doing so, Jay.
Yeah, see the difference is
No,
though
no, I
that's
think
not
I
actually
think
what neither of us actually think that white people should do the same. Nobody's saying that blacks should become enslaved the way the Jews enslaved blacks and should be exploited. What's been said is that, well, and I'm not saying that all blacks should move back to their countries. They're the ones that have been here since day one or as a result of slavery, and that they're willing to abide by the laws of the land, etc. Sure, I'm not advocating for ethnic cleansing. I'm just saying blacks within Africa should also be enabled, and I've even advocated for, and I've even brought up the examples of Burkina Faso, and look how much better they're doing now that they've been able to kick out those colonialists. And now but also they've all sought help from Russia and China to be able to enable themselves, learn how to mine their own gold, learn how to process it, refine it, and sell it. So this way they can actually invest back into their country and make education free. And that's a good thing. Okay, so I've also advocated for that. But when you've got, unfortunately, a disproportionate problem in the black community with culture, and also part of it is genetic as well, that a lot of them don't read or they read very poorly and can't handle math at a grade 12 level by the time they're 18, well, that's a huge problem. Okay, lack of literacy and poor math skills are a problem. And the fact that there's a high dropout rate and a lot of them don't get jobs and unfortunately resort to crime. And that's endemic within the community because again, that has to do with the fact that they're okay with with the single mother epidemic that's predominantly existing in the black community. Almost 70% of black kids are raised by a single
yeah.
parent. That's a huge problem.
So
But you
yeah,
want to make it about race
yeah,
because
we
you
could.
believe in that BLM bullshit. I don't. I think all lives matter.
No, I'm
I
not
don't
trying to
think
make it
white
about
lives matter
race.
than
I'm
anyone
just
else.
talking
No,
about
but
the double standard
it's
that
not a
I've
double
seen
standard.
directly from you, sir.
But you no, hold on. You're one of those people that are okay with things like affirmative action and DEI. I'm not. I don't believe in reparations. Because
No,
if it's going to be reparations, it should be for all, especially white people, because they've given the biggest sacrifices. They're the ones who died to end slavery, whereas blacks were still okay with slavery at that time. So were Jews.
yeah. Thanks for sharing your opinion there. I'm not going to comment on everything you said about black people. We could have a whole space on that in particular, but to circle it back, I never said that. Well, I didn't mean to say that you were promoting that. White people are, want to commit genocide or want to commit violence.
Yeah, but
All
Jews
I
do.
meant was that
That's the
you
difference. Jews do.
criticize. No, I do agree that Zionists are in favor, of violence, and I do believe that
Yeah, but your
ideology
problem
leads to
is you tried
violence.
to make
But
the
it's just,
false parallel of
yeah,
Jews to white people, saying, "Hey, look, white people equally
yeah. But if
discriminate."
you go
That's a
back
bunch of
just a
bullshit.
couple
That's a
hundred
trope
years and
because
you
there's
take
no
an
white
honest
person.
look, yeah, if you
Show me
take
the
an
book,
honest look at
Jay.
history,
Show me the
yeah, if you
equivalent
take
of a
an honest
Talmud that
look
a
at history,
white person drafted that wants to go wipe out and sees everyone else as
yeah,
minorities. Show me.
during a period of time, yeah, during a period of time called the Crusades,
Yeah,
you
you want
have
to go
white
back to the Knights
people,
Templar who were Jewish, right?
yeah, committing crimes in the name
This
of
is
religion.
hilarious. They were
So
Jews,
it's
Jay.
not
Those were
hard to
Jews.
find, it's not hard to find a point in history when
You want to
any
go
group
back?
of
Okay,
people has
listen.
been
You want to go
weaponized
back to 200
using
years in
religion.
history to make a generalization of all
However,
white people?
no,
Jews have
I'm
been
not
doing it for over
making a
3,000 years. So
generalization.
what's your
I
point?
am not make you're missing the whole point. My whole point going, which seems to be going above your head,
I
is
guess I'm
that
just not smart
any
enough, Jay.
religion can be weaponized against other groups of people. And by boiling it down to the genetics of the people who are being used, rather than identifying how their religion is being weaponized to manipulate them, is a problem. And I'm all in favor of calling out the problems in Judaism. So if Simon's position is Judaism is beyond criticism as a religion and he only wants to talk about Zionism, that's not my position.
But
I'm in
yeah,
favor of
just for
criticizing every.
That's not Simon's position
just for
either.
clarity, I choose to be a Muslim because I think it's the religion that I agree with, and so by definition, I would see it as a religion that's more suitable to me than Judaism and Christianity, and I follow the Quran in terms of my guidance. I don't follow anything else, and we see different tribes, and we serve humanity, and we don't think that by being born a Jew, that means that you are beyond taking your own actions and acting in a certain way. So my map of the world is as outlined in the Quran, and so yeah,
But
you can criticize.
to be fair to truth, and let me just explain his position because he spoke quite a bit and maybe people missed it. I don't think Truth's position, and correct me if I'm wrong, Truth. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't think your position conflicts with that. I think what his argument is this: that look, and by the way, I think this is my position as well. So just to let you know, this is my position. I've like just reading a lot of philosophical, theological books. I've read the books of Avicenna. Avicenna kind of holds this position as well, and as do many other philosophers and theologians of the past. But I had a different question about inbreeding to truth, which is separate anyway. But coming back to it, his position is this. I mean, anyway, I'll tell you my position, and maybe truth is a bit similar. But I think this is what he's trying to say. So each race or culture has and genetics, each person's genetics is different. For example, I'm an Asian, I'm a Pakistani, I'm shorter than a large number of people. You got black people who are genetically, physically more stronger. You got people who are smarter, you got people who are weaker, not as smart. And these things obviously vary individual to individual, but then there is some variation within race, and race do have certain dispositions, both physically and various other ways compared to others, and that could have been because of culture, it could have been because of various other things, but then it does become part of your genetics. For example, Asian. I always give this example. Like if you look at historically, you had the Raj system in India, in India because India and Pakistan was one, and you had the same thing in China, where basically the emperor would have a harem and all the women would come in the harem, and India had the same thing. But the difference was in China, what they would, and so they'd have the most beautiful, best looking women in there. And so imagine you take all the beautiful, best looking, the best genetics, and you put them within one specific area. So what would happen with China was if the emperor didn't procreate with those women by the age of 18, he would let them back into civilization. And so that stock, that good looking genetics, that kind of the best genetics from a female perspective, which can then be passed on from generation to generation, was put back into society, and it was allowed back into the gene pool. In India, that didn't happen. When I say India, I mean India, Pakistan, I mean the entire region. So what happened there was they would be removed completely from the genetic pool. So imagine you remove all of the best looking women, all the better genetics out of the gene pools, because it was that one. As soon as the Raj had them in the harem, now they were never ever allowed back in the gene pool, and they were never allowed to marry. That impacts the genetics significantly over time, which then may impact like various things like physical makeup, IQ, these type of things, and various other things. And so I do think that those have impact on a person. And so a person may be prone to certain things and have certain abilities and certain not. But then a person has free will and freedom. And so what it will be is, like, for example, let's say my genetics are my genetics, Truth's genetics are Truth's genetics. Maybe I might be better than him in certain things. He might be better than me in certain things. But now God's going to test us based on whatever those are and whether we've succeeded from that point X, even though that point X may not be the same for every single person. And then based on that, you then do some good or you do evil, because you still got that free will, that free ability, even though you may be more slightly prone to doing certain things or not prone to doing certain things. But that prone is basically based on culture. Maybe because of genetics, the culture impacts more or less because you're more of a sheep or not. And so I think and so in that regard, then you're still tested. There is that still free will, and then you're judged based on that. So, for example, like there's a position within one theological group who says like the one position within Islamic theology is, look, everyone's tested no matter what they do, no matter what, like, you do X, you get Y result. But then the other position is that actually what'll happen is each person has their own individualized test. And so what happens is, based on your own individualized makeup, even your IQ. So for example, let's say me, I feel like let's say I'm more smarter than another person. Do you believe that we're gonna have it'll take us the same amount of time to come to the realization that there's a God. No, someone with a lower IQ, and based on other cultural dispositions, maybe they get busy with family and various things, maybe they've got other responsibilities, maybe that person will take slightly longer to come to the realization of God. So will God say, look, cut off age 18, if you're not, you're going to go to hell? Or is it that each person's kind of map or timeline they have to come to the realization slightly different? So that's one of the theological groups' position, which I think is the strongest. So that basically, and I think that's what Truth's kind of saying, that there's like each individual has a certain makeup and then you still test it. But correct me if I'm wrong, if you, Truth.
Yeah, it's definitely along those lines. You've got hands. I don't want to just dominate your conversation here, but again, I never made I never gave specific ratios, percentages to what whether your traits manifest themselves or derive themselves from genetics versus culture, your environmental factors, etc. It's very difficult to make that assertion. Some say it's 50-50, 60-40. It really depends. But what I will contend is that, and I'll give the example of some Jews that figured it out, like Bobby Fischer, Benjamin Friedman, and Mordecai Vanunu, for instance, who figured it out, that, hey, this Judaism way is the wrong way to go. I'm screwing up here, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. So they moved past it. And they end up probably not succeeding as much as they could have, because they broke out of that ecosystem that they were in that could have afforded them many perks and privileges that Jews are able to get, because they control the system. Whereas, with you didn't see Bobby Fischer, Benjamin Friedman, or Mordecai Vanunu end up rich. In fact, Mordecai Vanunu, they honey trapped him, and he ended up in an Israeli prison for over 14 plus years, just because he decided to tell the truth, convert to Christianity, and he moved to, I believe it was Argentina, and they honey trapped him in Rome, in Italy, with that girl Cindy, who was a Mossad agent. So you see it quite clearly here that Jews are certainly capable of figuring out the righteous path. But if they remain within the Judaism path, they're far less likely to do so, because unfortunately their religion, their belief system is rooted in evil, and is rooted in racism and discrimination against Gentiles. They just think they're better, and unfortunately gets further magnified by the fact that many of them, not all, are also unfortunately subjected to genetic predispositions of paranoia, schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, etc., from all the inbreeding that they generally do, because they want to just marry within themselves. And we see this quite clearly in the Hasidic communities, also Orthodox communities, within Love Tahor, etc. I can go on and on. Even the so-called atheist, secular Jews, they prefer that their kid marry another Jew. And give you the example of Jamie Dimon, for instance. He didn't want to convert. A lot of pressure was put on him to convert by his wife. His wife's a Jew. Because he's a billionaire plus, they're like, okay, fine, but the kids get raised Jewish. Do you think he had a say in that? Absolutely not. So you see that they want to continue to perpetuate to the greatest extent that they can their gene pool, their bloodline, and they'll make some exceptions. But as far as culture and what their belief system, that needs to continue to be perpetuated. Even though they may lie and say atheist, secular, they're still going to want to maintain the status of Judaism. I'll pause there.
Yeah, so really quick, just to respond, to what you guys said, in terms of heritability in looks, and the person's like bodily makeup, obviously there is direct, influence from parents. However, when it comes to IQ and the mind, I think you actually have to look at the totality of the evidence.
Don't say it. Don't say it, please.
Yeah, I think it becomes pretty clear, what the main drivers are, in that situation. Because if you look at, say for example, the length of time that Eastern Europe was oppressed during the Soviet Union, and how the quality of life and the political instability, deteriorated during that time, and how the education was poor during that time, you see a direct correlation between the IQ levels of people in Europe. So your Eastern European countries have lower IQ on average than your Western European countries that weren't being oppressed by the USSR. And it is also worth noting that the greatest inventor of the last century actually came from one of the lowest IQ countries in Europe. Nikola Tesla is from Serbia, which has one of the lowest overall IQs in all of Europe. So if you look at the amount of time that Africa has been targeted and suppressed, and compare that to the amount of time that Eastern Europe has been targeted and suppressed, you see a clear, example of Africa being oppressed for longer, because out of all the continents on Earth, the wealthiest continent happens to be Africa in terms of resources. So obviously, the rest of the world has an incentive to keep that continent oppressed so they can benefit more from the resources that are over there. So this is not to say that white people are bad. I'm not trying to say I think white people are evil. I don't think anybody is evil. I think people are molded by their environments, by their culture. And if you look at, simply socioeconomic and cultural conditions, you'll realize that the people who perform the best in America also have a culture of studying the most. Asians study more than white people. White people study more than black and Hispanic people. Black people study the least. And we can talk about the reasonings behind that and the impact that systemic racism has on culture, in
It's a bunch
America.
of crap.
Without
Racism doesn't do is why black people don't study
going
more.
down that
It's just
because
endless
Maybe
I
cope
don't
I'll
is
want
go
to
what it
to
make
read
it
is.
more.
It's
because
just
I don't
endless
want to
cope,
make
and
it
it would go
about
on for
black people right
generations like
now.
this if it's not
My
checked.
only point is we all
See,
agree
this is a
we all
huge.
agree that
You're doing a
Zionism is a
huge disservice
problem.
to the black
And
community when you
and
say stuff like
and
this.
no, all I'm saying is culture does need to be improved in the black community. Culture in white America has also
Okay, I'm sorry, but
deteriorated,
culture,
and the
blacks did
people
better in the
and the
40s and
people
50s under segregation than they're doing now. Okay, they had a higher percentage, higher rate per capita of business ownership and land ownership. Did you know that? So it's not necessarily
Yeah.
just black
And do you
culture.
know
It's the
what
fact that
happened during
they allowed themselves to be
desegregation? Do you
negatively
know how
influenced by
many
things like the
black
Civil Rights Act.
neighborhoods were destroyed and buried under lakes in America and
Okay,
had
you know what?
highways
Earthquakes,
run through
hurricanes,
them?
typhoons have impacted lots of white countries as well. It gets
How
destroyed, then you
properties were
rebuild.
seized and what percentage of the
Pure crap
properties
right
that
now.
were
You're just
seized
gaslighting
were
right now.
black people? So when you talk about
You're an
what happened
apologist
in
for just
America,
yeah,
I would
right.
encourage you to look at the history. I would
Sure.
encourage
Why
you to
don't we
look
look
at
at
the
history? Why
actual
don't you look at the
facts
fact that
of what
if you look at
happened. So
sub-Saharan Africa,
so I don't
they
want to
couldn't
make it
figure out
about
how
black
they didn't
people.
invent the
I
wheel.
don't want to
They
make
couldn't
this
build
about
two-story
black
houses. They
people.
have no written
I
language. Why
don't
don't you
want to
look at
make
those
this about
aspects?
black
Jay, you
people.
already did. You brought it up.
My only
You brought
point
it up
is
though.
if you look at one
He
last thing,
always
then I'm
makes it
gonna land.
racial because that's the
One
lowest
last
common
thing, then
denominator
no,
for
I didn't make it
for a
racial.
conversation.
I didn't
That's
make
a
it
reflection
racial.
of your low
I
IQ
did not
being.
make it
You can't
racial.
address
I did not make it
the
racial.
evil. Hold on, you've completely subsided from the argument. Right now, this is a straw man argument trying to bring the racial component. We never even went there. You always do because you lose the argument on the fact that Judaism is evil. Because at the end of the day, you're always going to have that
So who
bias
brought
tinge
up?
as an
So
ethnic
who
Jew.
brought
You're
up?
not going to acknowledge
No,
the
no, no.
fact that Judaism,
Who brought
unfortunately,
up
leads to
black
wars, leads
people
to discrimination
higher
because they
crime
think they're better
rates
than
in
everyone else. They
America?
think they're
Who brought
chosen.
that up?
That's indiscreet. That's inherently racist.
I responded to you. Who
Didn't
brought
respond.
up the
You always bring
crime
up the
rate
racial
in
component because
Black
you're low
America?
IQ.
Do I acknowledge that the crime rate is higher in Black America than it is in the
Oh,
white community?
congratulations! You want a medal?
Of course, I acknowledge that.
Oh,
The
of course. How can you
situation
deny it? It's a
disagree is
fact.
the reason behind that. I do agree
But
culture
there's a
has something
reason for it.
to
It's
do
not
with
their
it.
fault. You
I
play the
do agree
victim card
culture
all
has
day.
something to
They
do with
didn't
it.
have
And
a
I
high
should
crime rate in
also
the 40s and
and I
50s,
do
Jay. Why weren't they
and the crazy
predisposed towards
thing to
crime
me
then?
and the
Jay,
crazy thing to
explain the
me
40s
is
and 50s. Why wasn't there a high crime rate around
who's
blacks then?
controlling the culture right now,
You're
truth.
just making excuses.
And yet no, you know who's controlling the culture, yet
Who? Tell
you
me, Jay.
yet
Who's controlling the culture? Who?
the establishment, which
Oh, the
includes a
Jews.
bunch of
He won't
guys,
even say it.
which
Who's the
includes
one that
which
controls the music
includes
industry? Who
which
controls the
includes a large
sports
amount of
entertainment? You won't
Zionists,
even admit
which
it. See,
includes
that's how much of
a
a
large
coward you
amount
are.
of
Your
Zionists
parents
who
raised a
have.
coward.
So listen, my only point is,
Just
if you
grow a
look
pair of
at the
balls and then have a
overall
conversation.
picture,
Okay. This is. I don't get what's happening with this conversation. I think it was decent, and now it's just completely derailed. I want to bring the conversation back to something that hopefully has some kind of utility. This topic's not about that issue, which is what the conversation went to. So bringing the conversation back in terms of the topic at hand. Oh, I don't even know what to bring it back to. Oh yeah, Ian, you mentioned you tagged me in a tweet with the percentages, but actually, according to Israelis themselves, the percentage is even higher than that. Because Beta Worldwide said 82% of Jewish Israelis. This is the Beta Worldwide is the ones who are the Jewish Zionist, like a NGO group, I believe. They're responsible for doxing a lot of the protesters from the college students in the United States of America. And they were basically responsible for like a lot of them like losing their jobs or whatever. Everyone, you know what I'm talking about, right? Beta Worldwide. They said 82% of Jewish Israelis believe there are no innocent people in Gaza. that means they don't see women, children, men, or even babies as innocent. So this is what they said. The figures from them: 82% is the figure according to them. That's even bigger than the one you just tagged me in. But yeah, jump in. What's your thought? Because I think the one you tagged me in was 65. 82% of Israelis support forced expulsion, but only 65% of Israelis supported a modern day enactment of Amalek. But so in your one, 65%, but they're saying 82%. But what's your thoughts on that, Ian?
Yeah, and the numbers are, I mean, you're exactly correct. The numbers are even higher. Obviously, the percentage of Israeli Jews that support what's going on is through the roof. And it's also worth noting that a overwhelming chunk of American Jews are also in support of what's taking place there. They're also self-proclaimed Zionists, which plays into this larger conversation. The 65%, the reason that I bring that one up, Amalek, I mean, this is something that goes back to this worldview, right? Because this is religious supremacy in nature. This is not just saying these are problematic or dangerous people. We need to get rid of them because they are a threat to us, or they are terrorists, or we don't like their politics or anything along those lines. This is, we deserve to be able to just remove all of them from the face of the earth because of this supremacist ideology, which includes, like you're saying, Suleiman, the men, the women, the children, the babies, and also even the animals, right? This is scorched earth on everything. It would make Sherman's March to the Sea look like a daycare. And I think it's worth noting that, where does this type of ideology come from? Because to Truth's comment, I mean, show me a group of whites anywhere who have ever said we need to absolutely murder every last ... Right? And you're going to have to look in some pretty obscure places like the Knights Templar, like Truth brought up. But that's going way back, and he can also make some connections that those were actually Jews behind that mission. But either way, anybody that would advocate for this, and I'm very much, despite the fact that I like talking about the genetics, I'm not an all everybody is anything. Like, I stay away from that. And people like Simon Dixon that, do have Jewish genetics, let's say, but speak out against Zionism, I think are not only, it's not only admirable, but I also respect it, because I do know that there's a cultural pressure for him to not necessarily critique his own group. And that goes back to this in-group versus out-group biases that when you look at Jews worldwide, oh, by the way, it's extremely high, not only across the religious alignment, but also the, let's say, shared heritage alignment. So people that are Jewish do have a propensity to drastically prefer other Jews, even if they are atheist or agnostic in their beliefs. So it's not about the religion. It's about, we are one and the same. And to tie this into some of the things really quickly that Truth was talking about with the bottleneck and the Ashkenazi, and he's absolutely right. It goes back, about 800, 900 years to these four original European mothers, at least with the Ashkenazis. And this is for the large majority. This isn't 100%. It's a very high percentage of them. And the thing that's interesting is not only were there essentially hundreds of years of inbreeding amongst these people, but I know I've talked about it, Suleiman, with you in the past, but for anybody that hasn't heard it, because Jay was bringing up, do all people with certain genetics have certain characteristics? And we could look at twin studies where twins, even separated at birth, do end up not only behaving similar, but they have similar facial expressions and all kinds of things that you really can't otherwise explain unless there's something happening that's not just genetics. And this goes to this idea of the silver fox study, which I'm not going to go into all of its detail, but to really quickly synopsize the whole thing, it's essentially, to synthesize, it's essentially that they took foxes in Russia over the course of about 20 or 30 years. They separated them based on temperaments, putting the friendly ones in one corner, putting the more, let's say, rabid ones in another corner. They had them breed amongst themselves several generations, again, over 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And what ended up happening is that the ones that were friendlier at the offset eventually birthed wild foxes that were essentially house pets. They would walk in, they would pick them up, they would lick their face, they were completely docile and friendly. They then, by comparison, the rabid ones, they got even more rabid. They got even more violent, right? They basically became feral animals. And it's worth bringing this up because those two things at birth, if you had to just put them right next to each other, anybody in science, even testing at the blood genetic level, would say this is the same species of animal, and yet the behavior is totally different. And so the reason I bring this up is because you can take genetic similarities, and if you reinforce them generation over generation over generation with some kind of learned experience or temperament or whatever, it manifests itself throughout the ages. And some woo-woo people say that this is generational trauma. Maybe they say it's the sins of your father passes to you. Like, there's 100 different ways that you can break it down, but the scientific reality is that there's something irrefutably that is passed from group to group to group. And if you think of the Jewish individuals that would have been part of this, out group that, again, came from these 4 European mothers that probably at the offset, they went and they sought out men from a different tribe, probably because there was some kind of animus towards them. So if you then insulate yourself and have generation after generation after generation, maybe passing down stories of we hate those people that we left because blah, 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 you can see how you might develop a tendency that even if it's not expressing itself every single day, that below the surface, it's somehow at play. And I believe that that is the reality and the result when we talk about things like high trust societies, right? These are social networking mechanisms that operate at a level that transcends just the genetics. It is somehow this shared capacity that largely Western society, largely Christian society was able to develop. And then you induce into that, or you introduce into that, an out group that does have some kind of generational animus that, is, again, below the surface, and that is mixed with this supremacist ideology where the religion of supremacy reinforces a culture of supremacy, which perhaps reinforces a genetics, both at an obvious and maybe a more below the surface level. And you can understand how all these things continuously reinforce themselves and create this group that, for whatever reason, could then vote and say 65% of all of us agree we need to remove all of these things and all of these people, regardless of whether they're guilty or innocent or barely born. We need to get rid of all of them. And it really is. It's a wild statistic. You're absolutely right, Suleiman, in that it's a far higher percentage of them that want all the Palestinians gone and that probably believe that they have the right to kill all of them. But to see that 65% of the Israelis that were polled said, scorched earth, everybody and everything. It is wild that we live in a world where there's a group of people that not only can vote that way, but that most other people, when presented with it, that are part of that global group, will somehow feel the need and compulsion to defend it. Because I don't care if it was any Western Christian